The chime of the grandfather clock in the foyer was a deep, resonant B-flat. 7:43 p.m., 17 minutes late. My husband, Julian, was a creature of meticulous, almost fanatical, precision. His punctuality was not a courtesy. It was a statement of control. For him to be 17 minutes late was a deviation, a discordant note in the rigidly composed symphony of our life. And I, in my self-imposed silence in the cavernous living room, was an analyst of discord. I did not move from the wing-back chair. The book in my lap, a dense treatise on Byzantine history, was a prop. My eyes were not on the page. They were fixed on the point in the middle distance where the reflection of the recessed lighting met the encroaching darkness outside the plate glass window. Julian called this house our sanctuary. I knew it for what it was, a gallery, a beautifully curated, climate-controlled space designed to display his success. And I was the most prized, and most stationary, exhibit. The sound of his key, in the lock, was sharp, decisive. A scrape of metal, a confident click. Even in his tardiness, there was arrogance. I heard the soft sigh of his leather briefcase being placed on the marble console table, the whisper of his cashmere overcoat being slipped from his shoulders. Each sound was a data point, fed into the silent, humming engine of my mind. Traffic reports showed clear arteries from his downtown office to our gated enclave. The 17-minute discrepancy, therefore, was not a product of external factors. It was a choice, an unscheduled stop, or, more likely, a scheduled one he had failed to log in our shared calendar. It made no difference. The outcome was the same, a deviation that required analysis. Kalen, his voice called out, echoing slightly in the cathedral-like space. I allowed a full 3 seconds of silence to pass before answering. Let him feel the emptiness of the gallery. Let him wonder which shadow I occupied. In the living room, Julian, my voice was calm, level, the carefully modulated tone of a wife at peace in her sanctuary. It was a role I had played for so long. The mask had all but fused to my skin. He appeared in the grand archway that separated the living room from the foyer. A tall, handsome silhouette against the brighter hall light. He was, I could admit with detached objectivity, a physically impressive man, like a piece of well-made, expensive machinery. His hair was artfully tousled, his suit was impeccably tailored, and his jaw was firm. He was designed to be looked at, to command a room, to inspire confidence in investors and envy in rivals. He was a masterpiece of surface tension. "Reading in the dark, darling?" he asked, his voice a soft, chiding melody. He flicked a switch, and the room bloomed with soft, strategic pools of light. His lighting design. Of course, everything here was his design. I was resting my eyes. I lied. My own voice, a smooth, polished surface. I closed the book, its spines still stiff and uncreased, and placed it on the side table. Another useless little lie. Our marriage was built on a foundation of them, small, weightless untruths that, when stacked one on top of the other, had built a wall between us so high we could no longer see over it. He walked towards me, loosening the knot of his silk tie. He smelled of his usual cologne, a sharp citrusy scent that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but there was another note beneath it, something floral, sweet, powdery. It was not my perfume. My internal systems logged the new data point without comment. "How was your day?" he asked, the perfunctory question, the obligatory opening move in the nightly chess game of our cohabitation. "Quiet," I replied. "Productive." I did not elaborate. He never asked for details. My work, my quiet, part-time consultancy in high-level risk analysis for a boutique firm, was something he referred to as my hobby. It was the one corner of my life I had managed to keep separate from him, the one place where I was not Mrs. Julian Maxwell, but simply Kalen, the analyst whose predictive models were legendary for their terrifying accuracy. "And yours?" I asked, my own obligatory move. He sighed, a theatrical exhalation of manufactured stress. It was a performance, and he was its sole, adoring audience. He ran a hand through his perfect hair. "Incredible," he said, his voice dropping into a register of hushed importance. "Absolutely tectonic. We're on the verge of something that will redefine the entire industry, Kai. Truly." I waited. Patience was my oldest and most reliable weapon. My entire career had been built on it, on watching the slow, subtle shifts in market data, waiting for the precise, optimal moment to advise a client to strike. Julian saw patience as passivity. He had no idea. It was the coiled energy of a predator, the merger with Belmont Capital. I prompted, my tone one of polite, wifely interest. His face lit up with a genuine, incandescent enthusiasm. It was the look he usually reserved for a newly acquired company or a particularly fawning magazine profile. More than a merger, a new entity, a dynasty, a visionary. She sees the landscape exactly as I do. Together, we are going to build an empire. The name hung in the air, shimmering with significance. Isolde Belmont. The name of the floral perfume now had a face. I had, of course, already compiled a complete dossier on her. It was on my encrypted personal server, under a folder labeled Threat Analysis. Her photograph showed a woman of breathtaking elegance, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a decadent, knowing smile. A woman who looked like she devoured men like Julian for sport, a worthy adversary. That's wonderful, Julian, I said. The lie felt like swallowing ground glass, but my voice didn't betray a hint of it. He moved to the bar cart, a monstrosity of chrome and smoked glass that he adored and I despised. He poured himself a generous measure of single malt scotch, the amber liquid catching the light. He didn't offer me one. He hadn't for months. It was another small deviation, another data point logged, a subtle erosion of partnership. He took a sip, turning to face me, the crystal tumbler cradled in his hand like a scepter. It is wonderful, he said, his voice becoming serious, weighty, and it's going to require everything. My absolute, undivided focus, my complete commitment. My heart rate remained a steady 62 beats per minute. I monitored it out of habit, a biofeedback loop of forced calm. You've always been committed to your work. This is different, he said, taking a step closer. He was entering my space now, asserting his presence, his power. This isn't just about growing the company anymore. This is about legacy, our legacy. He gestured vaguely at the opulent, sterile room around us. This house, this life, it's just the foundation. But to build the skyscraper, I need to know that foundation is solid rock, unshakable. I need to know my home life is perfectly managed, perfectly supportive. I tilted my head, a small, questioning gesture. I thought it was it smiled at me then. It was a smile I had come to dread. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated condescension. It was the smile of a king bestowing a favor upon a courtier. It never, ever reached his eyes. It is, darling, you're wonderful at it. But your job, he let the word hang in the air between us, as if it was something distasteful, something he'd found on the sole of his shoe. It's a distraction, for you, and by extension, for me. My job, my 20 hours a week, my mathematical sanctuary, the one place where my mind was allowed to run free, to engage with complex problems that had nothing to do with which caterer to hire for his latest dinner party. The one thing I had kept for myself. It's only 20 hours a week, Julian. It's hardly a distraction. It's 20 hours where your focus is not on us, he countered, his voice as smooth as silk, wrapping around his demand like velvet around a shard of glass. It's 20 hours where your mind is on some pointless report for some insignificant little firm. When I am entertaining people like Isolde and her team, I need a partner by my side, not a consultant who has to check her emails. We are about to enter a new social and financial stratosphere. Kaylin, it requires a full-time commitment. You won't need the money. God knows, what I'm about to make will render your little salary utterly, laughably obsolete. My little salary. The phrase echoed in the silent chambers of my mind. The blood in my veins felt like ice water. But my brain was on fire. It was processing, connecting, calculating, the condescension, the casual dismissal of my work, the cloying scent of Isolde's perfume on his collar, the demand veiled as a loving, reasonable request. It all coalesced into a single, undeniable, ice-cold conclusion. He wasn't just asking me to quit my job. He was asking me to cease to exist. He wanted me to become a silent, decorative, supporting character in the grand drama of his life, the perfectly managed foundation, buried deep underground and never seen. While he and Isolde built their glittering empire on top of me, my training, the discipline of 1,000 hours spent staring at data streams, took over. Never react in the moment of attack. Observe, gather data, concede the battle to win the war. I let my expression soften. I allowed a flicker of what he would interpret as hurt, as disappointment, to cross my face. I let my shoulders slump just a fraction of an inch. It was a masterful performance of feminine defeat. I see, I said, my voice a carefully constructed whisper of capitulation. He seized on it instantly, pressing his advantage, his voice softening now that he sensed victory. He was magnanimous. He crouched in front of my chair, taking my hands in his. His skin was warm and dry. Mine was cold as marble. I knew you would, he said, his voice a soothing balm of poison. Think of it, Kai. No more deadlines, no more stress. You can focus on this beautiful home, on us. We can travel. You can dedicate yourself to the philanthropic work we've talked about. You will be the perfect corporate wife, the envy of everyone. You will be a beautiful object in my display case. That's what he meant. I looked into his handsome, earnest, lying face. The floral scent was stronger now, an olfactory confirmation of his betrayal. My mind was already leagues ahead of him, the plan unfurling like a complex, multi-layered schematic. The shell corporations I maintained as a matter of professional habit. The portfolio he knew nothing about, built from the seed money of an inheritance my grandmother had insisted be placed in an ironclad trust under my name only. The Phoenix Fund, I called it, a secret war chest I had quietly, brilliantly grown. For a day I had prayed would never come, but I was a risk analyst. I always planned for the worst-case scenario, and looking at my husband, at the man who had just declared my life's passion obsolete, I knew the worst-case scenario had just pulled up a chair and made itself at home. I squeezed his hand, a gesture of reassurance, a signal of my surrender. Okay, Julian, I said softly, my voice a perfect imitation of a defeated woman. If it's that important to you, for our legacy, I would quit my job, just as he asked. Of course I will, darling. My analytical mind was already running the numbers. He thought he was building an empire. He had no idea he was simply leveraging it for me. He wanted me to focus on our life, and I would focus on it with a singularity of purpose he could not possibly imagine. I would focus on dismantling his. I'll call my firm in the morning, I added, sealing my performance. I will make a different call first. He kissed my forehead, the victor's seal, the brand of ownership. That's my girl, he said, his voice full of satisfaction. He stood up, pleased, triumphant, and utterly, blissfully oblivious. He walked back to the bar to refresh his drink, his back to me. I watched the straight, confident line of his spine, and in the cold, silent, humming core of my mind, I began the acquisition process. The next morning, the sun streamed through the plate glass windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Julian had left early, a triumphant spring in his step. Big day, Key, the first day of the rest of our lives. He had boomed, kissing me with the breezy ownership of a man who believed he had successfully managed a difficult but ultimately compliant asset. I had smiled, I had waved, I had closed the heavy oak door behind him, and the smile had fallen from my face like a stone. The house was silent again, my gallery, my cage, but now, the bars felt different. They felt like the starting grid of a racetrack. I did not go to the kitchen to make coffee. I did not go to the gym for my morning workout. I went to my study, the one room in the house that was truly mine. Julian found it austere, cold. It contained a single, large desk, an ergonomic chair, and a triple monitor setup that was a direct high-speed link to my real life, my real work, the work he thought was a hobby. At 9 a.m. sharp, I did not call my boss to quit. I initiated a video conference on a heavily encrypted, closed-loop network. A moment later, a face appeared on my central screen. Mara. Her salt and pepper hair was cut in a practical, no-nonsense bob. She wore no makeup. Behind her were not minimalist paintings, but shelves groaning with the weight of legal binders and financial reports. Mara was my lawyer, my financial advisor, and the only other human being on the planet who knew about the existence of the Phoenix Fund. Her expression was, as always, direct and unreadable. Kaylin, she said, her voice a gravelly greeting that was devoid of pleasantries. You're using the Onyx channel. This is either very bad news or very good business. Which is it? Julian asked me to quit my job last night, I said, my voice flat, relaying the information like a field report. Mara's eyebrows, which I had previously believed to be immobile, shot up towards her hairline. It was the most dramatic expression I had ever seen her make. He what? After all these years, He's finally getting around to officially demanding you become a professional hostess. His words were that he needs me focused on our home life as he enters a new partnership. He's merging with Isolde Belmont. Mara let out a low whistle. She swiveled in her chair and typed something on a keyboard out of my view. Isolde Belmont, Belmont Capital, flashy, aggressive, and, according to the whispers on the street, dangerously overleveraged. There have been rumors of a serious cash flow problem for the last 2 quarters. She needs a lifeline, not a partner. And Julian is throwing it to her, I said. He's calling it a merger of equals, a new dynasty. He's calling it that because his ego is the size of a small moon, Mara countered bluntly. What he's actually doing is taking on her massive debt and her high-risk portfolio in exchange for the public relations boost of having the Belmont name attached to his. It's a stupid, arrogant, emotional move. Vanguard Innovations is solid, but it's not invulnerable. Taking on Belmont's liabilities, especially in this market, could sink them both. I leaned forward, my fingers steepled under my chin. The analytical part of my brain was humming, alive and electric in a way it hadn't been for years. The dull, chronic ache of my compromised life was gone, replaced by the sharp, clean thrill of the hunt. The betrayal was no longer a wound. It was fuel. It was purpose. That's what I'm counting on, Mara. I need to see the numbers, all of them. I want to see Vanguard's complete debt structure, who holds their paper, who are their primary creditors. And I need to see the preliminary merger agreements. You still have our source inside their general counsel's office. Mara's expression shifted, the surprise melting away, replaced by a slow, dawning comprehension. A thin, dangerous smile touched her lips. He's been complaining about his bonus for the last 3 months. I imagine he's feeling very cooperative. So this isn't a "my husband is a monster" call. This is a "liquidate the Phoenix Fund" call. This is an "activate the Phoenix Fund" call. I corrected her gently. Liquidation is too simple. It's too clean. I don't want to just cash out. I want to buy in. Silence. Mara stared at me through the screen, her sharp, brilliant mind processing the audacious, terrifying implications of my words. Buy in? You mean, purchase a minority stake, become an activist investor, rattle his cage from the inside? No, I said. The word was cold, hard, final. I don't want a stake. I want the whole thing. I want Vanguard Innovations. I want the company he is building with her to become mine. He told me my job was a distraction. I'm about to make it my full-time occupation. Mara leaned back in her chair, a look of profound and slightly terrified respect in her eyes. Jesus Christ, Kaylin, you're not planning a divorce. You're planning a hostile takeover. He made it corporate the moment he decided my value was best realized as his chief entertainer and social secretary. I stated, my voice devoid of heat, a simple statement of fact. He wants me to quit my job. Fine. I'll need something to occupy my time. I've decided my new hobby will be owning my husband's company. The next 4 hours were a blur of intense, focused work. The plan was audacious, borderline impossible. But it was founded on one simple principle that Julian himself had always preached but never truly understood. Information is the only currency that matters. He thought money was power. He was wrong. Control over money was power, and control came from information. Mara's source delivered. A stream of encrypted files began to populate a secure server only she and I could access. The merger agreement, Vanguard's current, unvarnished balance sheets, their list of creditors. And there it was, the weak point, the fatal flaw in Julian's grand design, the vulnerability created by his own arrogance. A significant portion of Vanguard's operating debt, 41%, was held, not by a major bank, but by a mid-level investment house, Sterling Coal. And Sterling Coal, according to Mara's real-time data feeds, was in serious trouble. They had overexposed themselves in the volatile South American commodities market and were now desperate to clean up their books before their quarterly earnings call. They needed liquidity. They would be highly motivated to sell their debt, Vanguard's debt, quickly, quietly, and at a discount. If we acquire that debt through a shell, we become his primary creditor, Mara explained, her voice buzzing with the thrill of the chase. The merger with Belmont will require new financing, a complete restructuring of his existing debt. As the primary debt holder, we would have to sign off on that. We could block the entire deal. Blocking isn't enough, I said, my eyes scanning the columns of numbers on the screen. They were like a piece of music I could read perfectly, a symphony of his arrogance and his oversight. He'll just find financing elsewhere. It will be a setback, a major one, but he'll recover. I don't want to set him back. I want to checkmate him. What do you have in mind? Mara asked, her pen poised. The debt covenants, I said, my finger tracing a line on my own screen. Section 4, subsection B, change of control provisions. Julian wrote these agreements himself years ago to protect himself from a hostile takeover. They're ironclad. He was so proud of them. If any single entity, or a consortium of related entities, gains control of more than 50% of the company's outstanding debt, they have the right to call the entire loan due immediately, or, I let the word hang in the air, they have the option to convert the debt to equity. Mara was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the faint hum of my computer's cooling fans. Convert to equity, she breathed, the words full of reverence for the sheer, brutal elegance of the strategy, at the valuation set at the time of the agreement, before the company's last 5 years of explosive growth. Precisely, I said. He's so focused on the future value of this new, merged company with Isolde, he's forgotten the poison pill he planted in his own garden years ago. Sterling Coal holds 41% of the debt. Two other smaller creditors, Fiduciary Trust and Apex Holdings, hold another 12% combined. If we, through a series of untraceable shell corporations, can acquire all of that paper, we will hold 53% of Vanguard's debt. Mara's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated awe. You wouldn't just be his creditor, Kaylin. You would, for all intents and purposes, be his partner, the silent partner with all the power. No, I said, pulling up the final file. It was the execution order for the Phoenix Fund, a cascade of buy orders, timed and structured to go through 3 different holding companies based in Delaware, the Cayman Islands, and Luxembourg, untraceable back to me, for now. I looked at the name at the top of the order, the name of the new parent entity that would, by the close of business this evening, own a controlling interest in my husband's future. I won't be his partner. My finger hovered over the execute button on my screen. I thought of Julian's triumphant, condescending smile, of the scent of Isolde's perfume on his coat, of the phrase, my little salary, I'll be his boss. I clicked the mouse. The order was sent. The gears of the vast, silent, global financial machine began to turn, grinding in my favor. The avalanche had begun. Outside, the sun shone brightly on my beautiful, gilded cage. But I was no longer inside it. I was watching it on a screen, my finger on the button that controlled the locks. The day was just beginning, and Julian had no idea that the rest of his life had just been bought. The click of the mouse was an absurdly small sound, a faint, plastic percussion lost in the cavernous silence of my study. It was a sound wholly disproportionate to the magnitude of the action it had just initiated. It was the whisper that starts an avalanche, the single raindrop that precedes a deluge, an order, fragmented and scattered across 3 continents through layers of impenetrable encryption, was now cascading through the world's financial arteries. The Phoenix Fund was airborne. For a few seconds, I did nothing. I simply stared at the confirmation on my central monitor. Orders executed. My heart rate, which I had expected to spike with adrenaline, remained a placid 64 beats per minute. The detachment was absolute. A surgeon who has just made the first irrevocable incision knows there is no room for emotion. There is only procedure. Only the cold, clean, methodical execution of the next step, and the next. I spent the next hour in a state of heightened, focused awareness, monitoring the initial transactions. My shell corporations were designed for speed and anonymity. The first, Epsilon Tango Holdings, a Delaware-based entity with a deliberately nondescript name, sent its acquisition offer to the trading desk at Sterling Coal. The offer for their entire portfolio of Vanguard Innovations debt was priced at a 2% discount, but the payment was guaranteed within 90 minutes. For a firm as desperate for liquidity as Sterling Coal, it was an irresistible offer, a life raft in a churning sea of red ink. They didn't question the anonymous buyer. They just saw the wire transfer clearing and signed. Men like them always did. Fear is a far greater motivator than curiosity. At 10:17 a.m., a secure message blinked in the corner of my screen. It was from Mara. It was a single line of text. Epsilon has landed. 41% is ours. The first pillar had fallen simultaneously. My other two entities, Helios Acquisitions and Nix Consolidated, approached the two smaller creditors. Their offers were slightly above market rate, a sweetener to ensure a swift, no questions asked transaction. These smaller firms would not be as desperate as Sterling Coal. They required inducement, not rescue. By 11:30 a.m., Mara's second confirmation arrived. Helios and Nix are secure. The package is complete. It was done in the space of a single morning. In less time than it took Julian to conduct one of his self-important board meetings, I had become the majority debt holder of my husband's company. My company now, he just didn't know it yet. I systematically closed the programs, wiping the session logs and rerouting the proxy servers through a final series of burn relays. The screens faded to black, reflecting my own impassive face. I left my study, the one room in the house that was truly mine, and walked out into the vast, open-plan space that was his. The silence of the house was different now. It was no longer the oppressive silence of a cage. It was the vibrant, electric silence of a hunting blind. I did what a newly unemployed, devoted wife was supposed to do. I went to the kitchen, a gleaming cathedral of Italian marble and stainless steel, and consulted a recipe on a tablet, a complicated coq au vin, the kind of dish that suggested hours of loving, domestic labor. I assembled the ingredients with methodical precision. I chopped the vegetables into perfectly uniform pieces. I seared the chicken. I let the scent of wine and herbs fill the air. It was a performance for an audience of one, and I was a consummate actress. My whole marriage had been a rehearsal for this day. At 2:48 p.m., as I was skimming the fat from the slowly simmering pot, Mara's third message came through on my watch, which was singed to our secure channel. A simple vibration, a single coded word, tremor. The shockwave had hit Vanguard Innovations. I could picture the scene with perfect clarity. Mara had provided me with the complete schedule for their merger team. At 2:45 p.m., Julian's chief financial officer, a perpetually sweating, anxious man named Gerald Finney, was scheduled to have a preliminary call with his counterpart at Sterling Coal. The purpose of the call was to discuss the terms of refinancing Vanguard's existing debt to accommodate the new liabilities from the Belmont merger. It would have been a routine call, the first of dozens, except it wasn't. Gerald would have opened with some bland corporate pleasantry, and the man from Sterling Coal would have cut him off. He would have informed Gerald, with no small amount of relief in his voice, that they no longer held Vanguard's paper, but that they had sold their entire position that morning. Gerald's panic would have been immediate. A primary creditor does not simply sell a position of that size without notifying the debtor. It was an aggressive, hostile move. To whom? Gerald would have stammered. Who is the new creditor? And the man from Sterling Coal would have cited the non-disclosure agreement tied to the sale. He would have politely and firmly ended the call. The first tremor. Gerald, a man whose primary characteristic was loyalty born of fear, would have hung up the phone and not walk directly to Julian's office. The hunt was on. The search for the phantom who now held the financial fate of their company in its hands. They would be scrambling, terrified, and completely, utterly blind. I added a bay leaf to the pot. The aroma was rich, complex, the aroma of a quiet, domestic life. Julian was late again, not 17 minutes late, an hour and 42 minutes late. The sound of his key in the lock was not sharp and confident. It was clumsy, fumbled. The click was muted, uncertain. He didn't place his briefcase on the console. It thudded to the floor like a dead weight. His overcoat was thrown haphazardly over a chair, not hung. The carefully composed symphony of his arrival was broken, shattered into 1,000 discordant notes. Dissonance had entered my perfect, sterile gallery. He found me in the kitchen, tasting the sauce from a wooden spoon. I looked up, the picture of domestic tranquility. He, on the other hand, was a storm. His expensive tie was gone, the top 2 buttons of his custom-made shirt undone. His perfect hair was disheveled, a mess from where he'd clearly been, dragging his hands through it again and again. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a frantic, hunted mixture of white-hot fury and ice-cold panic. "Did you know?" he barked, his voice a raw, ugly sound that was entirely out of place in our pristine home. The word was an accusation, hurled across the marble island. I looked up slowly, my expression a carefully crafted mask of gentle surprise. I put the spoon down with deliberate care. "No, what, Julian? You look terrible. Is everything all right at the office?" Don't play dumb with me, Kaylin, he snapped, striding into the kitchen. He was pacing now, a caged animal. My animal. In my cage. He smelled of stale sweat and fear. The expensive cologne was long gone. Someone bought our debt. All of it. Sterling Cole fiduciary. Trust. All of it. In one morning. In one coordinated, surgical strike. I let my expression morph into one of concerned confusion. I was an excellent actress. I let my brow furrow. I let my eyes widen slightly. Bought your debt. What does that mean? Is that a bad thing? His jaw worked, grinding his teeth. He was looking at me, but his eyes were seeing conspiracies, enemies in every shadow. Is it bad? He mocked, his voice a harsh, grating laugh that held no humor. Yes, Kaylin, it's bad. It's a goddamn catastrophe. It means some hostile entity, some faceless vulture fund, now holds a gun to the company's head. The merger with us, Ulda, it's dead in the water until we know who they are and what they want. They have to approve the new financing. They could block the entire deal just for leverage. Oh, Julian, I said, my voice soft with manufactured sympathy. I wiped my hands on a linen towel and walked toward him. He flinched slightly as I approached. Interesting, a new data point. He was already seeing threats everywhere. Who would do such a thing? Who? He laughed again, that same ugly sound. It could be anyone, one of our competitors, a corporate raider from overseas. Isolde even suggested. He stopped himself, looking at me with a new, strange intensity. His panicked mind was casting about for a villain, and the possibilities were clearly overwhelming him. He saw sharks in every corner of the ocean, never guessing that the great white was living in his own reef. Suggested what? I prompted gently, my voice a soothing balm on his raw, frayed nerves. Nothing. It's insane, he muttered, turning away from me to resume his frantic pacing. We can't find out who it is. A series of shell companies. Delaware, Cayman, Luxembourg. It's a professional hit. A ghost. Someone wants to destroy me before I can build my empire. I came up behind him and placed a hand on his arm. His muscles were tense, coiled like steel springs beneath the fine fabric of his shirt. He stopped pacing. We will figure it out, I said, my voice a soothing murmur. You are the smartest man I know, Julian. You'll find a way out of this. I'm here for you. I did what you asked. I called my firm this afternoon. I quit. It was a lie, of course, but it was a necessary one. A strategic deployment of truth at a critical moment. He looked at me then, his panic momentarily subsiding, replaced by a flicker of his old arrogance, mixed with something else. Gratitude, relief. He saw the compliant wife, the loyal partner, the one stable thing in his suddenly chaotic, terrifying world. He exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, and pulled me into a hug. It was awkward. The embrace of a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood. I rested my head on his chest, my expression a perfect blank. I could feel the frantic, rabbit-quick beating of his heart against my ear. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. You're right, he whispered into my hair, his voice shaky. You're right, I'll fix this. I have to. It's probably just some vulture fund looking for a quick payout, a shakedown. We'll find out who they are, and we'll offer them a premium. We'll buy the debt back. You can't afford it, I thought, a cold, hard certainty in my mind. I made sure of that. The Phoenix Fund has deeper pockets than you could possibly imagine. Whatever you need, Julian, I murmured into his shirt. I'm here. We're a team. We stood there for a long moment in the heart of our magnificent kitchen, the liar and the destroyer, locked in a meaningless, hollow embrace. The scent of the slowly simmering cocoa vin filled the air, a rich and fragrant perfume of my profound and utter deception. The subsequent 48 hours were in psychological warfare, executed with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a poison that leaves no trace. By day, I was the very picture of the newly liberated, supportive wife. I went to yoga classes. I had lunch with old friends I had long neglected, regaling them with feigned excitement about my newfound freedom and Julian's brilliant new venture. I bought a ridiculous number of expensive, fragrant flowers and arranged them throughout the house, turning our minimalist gallery into a vibrant, living space. The house had never felt so full of life. It was a beautiful, fragrant lie. By night, I was a ghost in my own home. While Julian slept the fitful, shallow sleep of a man under siege, I would slip into my study. The room was my silent, sterile command center. There, with Mara as my sole, disembodied advisor, I watched the chaos unfold at Vanguard Innovations. The data was more thrilling than any stock market trend I had ever analyzed. It was the frantic, erratic heartbeat of a company in crisis that Mara had, through her source, granted me covert read-only access to Vanguard's internal communications network. I watched their desperate attempts to unmask their new creditor. I saw the panicked emails, the frantic chains of instant messages. They were chasing ghosts, hiring expensive cybersecurity firms to trace the untraceable, to follow digital breadcrumbs I had meticulously designed to lead them in circles, from a server in Zurich to a data haven in Iceland to a shell company that had been dissolved 3 years prior. They were burning time, money, and morale on a futile quest. Julian was a man possessed. He was a caged lion, and the bars of his cage were made of his own ignorance. He was on the phone constantly, his voice a raw, angry weapon he brandished at his underlings. He and his CFO, Gerald, held marathon, circular meetings in his home officer room I now graciously and pointedly avoided. I would bring them coffee, my face a mask of wifely concern. "How is it going, darling?" I would ask, my voice soft with sympathy. He would snatch the cup from my hand, his eyes wild and unfocused. "It's a nightmare, Kaylin," he'd snarl. "A complete goddamn nightmare. It's like trying to punch smoke." "Oh, I know," I would think, my mind a cold, calm lake of satisfaction. I designed the smoke. Isolde Belmont was a constant, spectral presence. Her name lit up Julian's phone at all hours. I could hear his side of the conversations, the forced bravado, the strained reassurances. "No, of course this doesn't change anything, Izzy. Just a minor hiccup, a procedural snag." But I knew what she was. A predator. A shark that could smell a single drop of blood from a mile away. She could smell the blood in the water now, the blood of Julian's panic and weakness. Her enthusiasm for their merger, I analyzed, would be cooling with every passing hour of uncertainty. Her lifeline was proving to be an anchor. On the evening of the second day, Mara sent me a new message. The single word was stark and final. Checkmate. Her source had delivered the final piece of the puzzle. Julian, in a desperate attempt to reassure Isolde and his board, had called an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. the following day. His plan, as outlined in the meeting's agenda, was audacious and reckless. He was going to push through a resolution to issue a massive number of new company shares. The goal was to dilute the value of the existing equity to such a degree that it would devalue the debt I held, forcing my hand, compelling me to come to the negotiating table. It was a scorched earth tactic, one that would infuriate his existing shareholders and signal profound weakness to the market. It was the move of a gambler going Elin on a terrible hand. And it was the final, fatal era I had been waiting for. The new stock issue would require a complete refiling with the SEC, a public declaration of the company's new capital structure, and the conversion clause in my debt covenants gave me the right, as majority debt holder, to convert my debt to equity before any new stock could be issued. He had not just handed me the keys to the kingdom, he had gift-wrapped them and provided a limousine. That night, Julian was a ghost at the dinner table. He didn't eat the coq au vin I had so lovingly prepared. He just pushed the food around his plate, his eyes staring at nothing. "We have a plan," he said, the words heavy, directed more at himself than at me. "A way out. It's a long shot, but it's the only move we have left." "I'm sure it's a brilliant one," I said, taking a delicate sip of my wine. The burgundy was rich and full-bodied, the taste of victory. He finally looked at me, a flicker of the old Julian returning, the husband who believed he was confiding in his wife. "I need you to do something for me tomorrow." My heart remained steady. "Of course, darling, anything. I need you to not be here," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Go shopping. Go to a spa. I've already put the car service on standby for you. Take the corporate black card. I have the board coming here for a crisis meeting. It's going to be tense, and I don't want you to be caught in the middle of it." He wasn't protecting me. He was hiding. He was embarrassed. He didn't want me, his adoring, simple wife, to witness his humiliation, to see him backed into a corner by a phantom enemy. He wanted to maintain the illusion of the infallible provider, the master of the universe, even as his universe was crumbling around him. I smiled, a slow, gentle curve of my lips. It was the most genuine smile I had given him in years. "Whatever you think is best, Julian." The next morning, I rose early. I dressed with the care and precision of a soldier, preparing for a decisive battle, not a power suit, not the severe analyst. Today required something else entirely. I chose a sheath dress in a deep, visceral blood red. It was impeccably tailored, severe in its elegant simplicity, but utterly, undeniably commanding. I wore heels that were high enough to make a sharp, definitive click on the hardwood floors. My hair, I pulled back into a sleek, tight chignon at the nape of my neck. My makeup was minimal but stark. A clean line of black eyeliner, a bold, red lip. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see Julian's wife. I did not see a hobbyist consultant. I saw the CEO and sole director of the Phoenix Fund. The car service Julian had so thoughtfully ordered was waiting at the end of the long, gravel driveway at 8:30 a.m. I walked out, the morning air cool and crisp against my skin. I got into the back of the black sedan and smiled at the driver in the rearview mirror. "Change of plans," I said, my voice crisp and clear. "We're not going to the city. We're going to Vanguard Innovations Tower. The main entrance, please, and don't spare the horses." I arrived at the gleaming glass and steel monument to my husband's ego at 8:55 a.m., 5 minutes before his sham of a board meeting was scheduled to start in our home. As I walked through the cavernous, echoing lobby, past the large, brushed steel Vanguard Innovations logo that I had always despised, a few employees stared. They recognized me. I was Mrs. Maxwell, the boss's quiet, elegant wife, who appeared once a year at the company Christmas party. They would remember this day and this dress. Differently, Mara was waiting for me by the main elevator bank, a slim leather portfolio in her hand. She wore a dark navy suit that was the sartorial equivalent of a battleship. Her face was an unreadable mask of legal professionalism. She gave me a single, sharp nod as I approached. "They're all on the conference line," she said quietly. "Julian, Gerald, the 2 other board members, and Isolde Belmont is on the call as well." At Julian's invitation, apparently, a united front, a circular firing squad, I corrected. "Are you ready?" Mara's lips curved into a smile that was all teeth. "Kaylin," she said, her voice dropping lower, "I'm a lawyer. I live for this." We took the private elevator to the top floor, the executive floor. The doors opened onto a silent, plushly carpeted reception area outside the main boardroom. Julian's executive assistant, a young, efficient woman named Chloe whom I knew he was sleeping with, looked up in surprise. "Mrs. Maxwell," she stammered, her eyes wide. I wasn't expecting you. Mr. Maxwell is working from home today." "I know," I said, not breaking my stride as I swept past her desk. "He's about to be very surprised." I didn't knock on the boardroom door. It was my boardroom now. I pushed the heavy sandblasted glass door open and walked in. The room was empty, save for the large, menacing black speakerphone that sat in the center of the vast, polished mahogany table. Julian's voice was emanating from it, sounding tinny and distant. "And so the motion to issue the new Series B shares is on the table. Do I have a second?" "That won't be necessary, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the air. It was picked up by the microphone, amplified, and sent down the phone line to my husband, my father-in-law, and the woman he was trying to betray me for. A stunned, absolute silence fell on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint, static-filled sound of someone's breathing. Julian's voice finally came, confused, hesitant. "What are you doing at the office? What's going on?" I walked to the head of the table, to his chair, and placed my hands on its leather back. Mara stood beside me, placing her portfolio on the table with a soft, definitive thud. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," Mara began, her voice carrying the full, unflinching weight of legal authority. "My name is Mara Jensen. I am General Counsel for Epsilon Tango Holdings and its affiliated entities, which, as of close of business yesterday, became the majority debt holder of Vanguard Innovations." I could hear a sharp intake of breath on the line. It was she was the first to understand. Julian's voice was a choked whisper. "What is this? What the hell is going on? Kaylin, what does this have to do with you?" I leaned down towards the speakerphone, my mouth close to the microphone. I let the silence stretch for a beat, savoring the moment. I imagined Julian in our living room, his face pale, his world tilting on its axis. You asked me to quit my job, Julian, I said, my voice low, clear, and as cold as the grave. You said I should focus on something more productive. So I did. I paused, letting the words sink in. Epsilon Tango Holdings, Helios Acquisitions, and Nix Consolidated are all wholly owned subsidiaries of a single private fund. I looked at Mara, who gave me a slight, encouraging nod. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the city spread before me, my new kingdom. Then I leaned back in and delivered the final, killing blow. The fund, I announced, my voice ringing with absolute, triumphant clarity, is called the Phoenix Fund, and I am its sole director. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a final, devastating whisper. You wanted me to stop working for other people, so I decided to work for myself. And my first official act as CEO was buying your company. Congratulations, darling. You report to me now. The silence that followed my declaration was not empty. It was a physical presence, a vast, crushing weight of stunned disbelief that traveled down the phone line from our home, across the city, and into the boardroom where I stood. It was the sound of a universe breaking, the sound of a god discovering he was mortal. On the other end of the line, I could hear a faint, shuffling sound. A sharp, feminine voice as sold as muttered something vicious and indistinct, followed by the decisive, final click of her hanging up. The first rat was leaving the sinking ship. She was a pragmatist after all. There was no percentage in staying allied to a deposed king. Then came Julian's voice, but it was not the voice I knew. The confident, booming baritone was gone. In its place was a thin, strangled whisper, a sound of pure, uncomprehending horror. No, no, you're lying. This is a joke, a sick, twisted joke. You don't have the resources. I finished for him, my voice a blade of ice. The intellect, the will. You have always underestimated me, Julian. It was your most consistent, and now, your most fatal, flaw. You saw a wife, a hostess, a hobbyist. You never bothered to look at the analyst, the strategist, the woman who has been quietly building a multi-million-dollar private equity fund from a trust you never even knew existed. I heard a crash on the other end of the line. I pictured him sweeping a lamp off a table, a piece of art, shattering something in his impotent rage. It brought me a cold, distant satisfaction. The sterile gallery was finally showing some signs of life. The board meeting is adjourned, I stated, my voice ringing with an authority I had kept hidden for a decade. The motion to issue new shares is denied. My legal counsel, Miss Jensen, who is here with me, is now invoking the change of control covenant, Section 4, subsection B. As of this moment, the Phoenix Fund is converting its 50% debt majority into a 51.5% controlling equity stake in Vanguard Innovations. Paperwork will be filed with the SEC within the hour. You can't do this, he roared, his voice cracking with desperation. I'll fight you, I'll sue, I'll tell everyone you're insane. I'll take you for everything you have. Mara leaned towards the speakerphone, her expression one of utter, predatory calm. You'll do no such thing, Mr. Maxwell, she said, her voice a low, gravelly counterpoint to my sharp soprano. Firstly, the prenuptial agreement, which you yourself drafted, meticulously shields your wife's personal assets including her inheritance and any subsequent growth thereof from you, just as it shields yours from her. At the time of signing, your assets were considerably larger. That is no longer the case. Secondly, this is not a marital dispute. This is a legally executed corporate acquisition, conducted through established financial channels. Your personal relationship to the new majority shareholder is, I'm afraid, entirely and beautifully irrelevant. Every word was a nail hammered into the coffin of his old life. He was silent, utterly, completely silent. I could feel his world collapsing in on itself. The foundations turned to dust, the walls imploding. I straightened up, turning my back on the speakerphone. My gaze swept across the panoramic view of the city, from the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was all mine now, the company, the tower, this view. I had not just escaped my cage, I had purchased the entire zoo. Chloe, I said, my voice calm and clear, addressing the intercom on the conference table. Yes, Mrs. Max, the terrified assistant's voice crackled back. Ma'am, my name is Kaylin Sterling, I said, reclaiming my maiden name with a quiet, fierce pride. Please make a note of it. You will now be taking your directives from me. Your first task is to schedule a meeting for me with the heads of all departments for 2 o'clock this afternoon, here, in this boardroom. Attendance is not optional. Yes, Ms. Sterling, she whispered. And Chloe, I added, please have a pot of very strong, very black coffee sent up. And get me the complete unredacted financials on Mr. Maxwell's Special Projects Division. Specifically, Project Chimera. Right away, Ms. Sterling. I disconnected the intercom and looked at Mara. The fierce, brilliant lawyer, my only friend and ally, was looking at me with an expression of profound, unadulterated awe. That, she said, was the most hostile and most elegant takeover I have ever witnessed. It wasn't a takeover, Mara, I replied, walking over to the window. It was a correction, a balancing of the books. The hours between the phone call and the 2 o'clock meeting were a blur of focused, decisive action. The moment the call ended, I knew Julian would do one of two things: spiral into a rage-fueled paralysis, or attempt a desperate, reckless countermove. I had to neutralize him before he could act. With Mara's legal team executing the SEC filings, I turned my attention to the company's internal infrastructure. As the new majority shareholder and de facto CEO, I had the authority. I placed a call to the head of Vanguard's IT department, a man I had personally vetted and recommended for the job years ago, a man who owed his career to me, not to Julian. David, I said, my voice calm but firm. This is Kaylin Sterling. There has been a change in management. You will receive official confirmation shortly. I have an executive order for you, effective immediately. I want you to suspend all user privileges for Julian Maxwell. All of them. Email, network access, building access, corporate accounts. Lock him out of everything. He is to be considered a security risk. Is that understood? There was a moment of shocked silence, then a quiet, firm, yes ma'am, consider it done. I had cut the king off from his kingdom. He was now stranded in our house, a fortress that had suddenly become his prison. He had no access to his money, his communications, or his power base. He was an island. Next I dealt with this. I found her private cell number in Julian's emergency contact list, a file I had had access to for years. I called her. She answered on the first ring, her voice a wary, venomous hiss. What do you want, Ms. Belmont? I said, my tone cool and professional. This is Kaylin Sterling, the new acting CEO of Vanguard Innovations. I am calling to inform you that my board is officially terminating all merger negotiations between our two companies, effective immediately. Our legal team has reviewed the preliminary agreements and found them to be financially unsound. We consider Vanguard lucky to have escaped a partnership with a firm as over-leveraged and poorly managed as your own. She was silent for a moment, the insult hanging in the air. You've made a powerful enemy today, Miss Sterling, she finally said, her voice dripping with ice. No, I replied calmly. I have simply exposed a weak one. Goodbye. I hung up before she could respond. One threat neutralized. At 2 o'clock, I walked back into the boardroom. It was full. The heads of every department were seated around the long, mahogany table, their faces a mixture of fear, confusion, and morbid curiosity. They were the powerful vassals of a kingdom whose king had just been silently, swiftly decapitated, and they were waiting to meet the executioner. I took my place at the head of the table, my rightful place. Mara stood discreetly behind me, a silent, formidable presence. Good afternoon, I began, my voice resonating in the tense silence. My gaze swept across their faces, analyzing each one. I knew them all. I had studied the company's personnel files for years. I knew their strengths, their weaknesses, their ambitions, and their fears. As some of you may now be aware, there has been a significant change in the ownership structure and leadership of Vanguard Innovations. Effective this morning, I am the majority shareholder and acting CEO. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the room. I let it build for a moment before silencing it with a single, raised hand. I know what you are thinking, I continued. You are thinking that this is a domestic dispute played out on a corporate stage. You are mistaken. This is a course correction. For years, this company has been squandering its resources, chasing vanity projects, and prioritizing ego over sound financial strategy. That era is over. As of today, our sole focus is on profitability, efficiency, and sustainable growth. I looked directly at the head of sales, a charismatic bulldog of a man named Marcus Vance, most loyal lieutenant. There will be changes. Redundancies will be identified. Expense accounts will be scrutinized. Performance, not loyalty to the old regime, will be the only metric that matters. Then, I turned my attention to the sweating, terrified face of Gerald Finney, the CFO. Gerald, my team has been reviewing the numbers on Project Chimera, Julian's drone delivery venture. It has burned through $60 million in 2 years with no viable product to show for it. As of this moment, Project Chimera is terminated. All assets are to be liquidated. All personnel are to be reassigned or released. Is that clear? Gerald nodded, speechless, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. This is not a palace coup, I said, my voice rising with a new, hard-edged power. It is a restoration of fiscal sanity, a restoration of purpose. You can either be a part of this new vanguard, or you can be a part of its history. I expect your full, unwavering cooperation. If you cannot give me that, your resignations will be accepted, effective immediately. I stood there for a long moment, letting the weight of my words settle over them. I saw the fear in their eyes, but I also saw something else, a dawning respect. They were men of business, and they recognized strength when they saw it. They had just witnessed a display of power so absolute, so audacious, that it left no room for doubt. The age of Julian Maxwell was over. The age of Caleb Sterling had just begun. There would be no transition. There would only be a new and unforgiving reality. The dawn of my new empire broke, crisp and painfully bright. I had not gone home. Sleep was a luxury I could not afford. Instead, I had spent the night in my new office, Julian's former throne room, methodically, systematically, taking possession of my new kingdom. The first order of business was not financial. It was symbolic. It was an exorcism. I had the night maintenance crew, under the bewildered supervision of the facilities manager, strip the room bare. Gone was the ridiculously oversized mahogany desk that was more a monument to ego than a functional workspace. Gone were the plush leather chairs designed for schmoozing, not working. Gone were the self-aggrandizing framed magazine covers featuring Julian's smug, handsome face. Gone was the abstract painting full of angry, meaningless slashes of color that he had purchased for $250,000 by sunrise. The room was a hollow, echoing shell. I had it replaced with functional, minimalist efficiency. A simple, large standing desk made of brushed steel and recycled wood, a single, ergonomic chair, and on the main wall, where the abstract painting once hung, a vast, seamless bank of 6 data monitors, glowing with the cool, blue-white light of pure information. The message to the company was clear, unspoken, and absolute. The era of ego was over. The era of data had begun. I spent the morning submerged in that data. I was an oceanographer of numbers, diving deep into the company's unvarnished financials, a place Julian had clearly not visited in years. I found what I expected to find: waste, vanity, and gross inefficiency, all obscured by a thin veneer of healthy top-line revenue. His pet project, Project Chimera, had been a black hole, sucking up $60 million in R&D with no oversight. The corporate travel and entertainment budget was a testament to his love of luxury, with hundreds of thousands spent on private jets, 5-star hotels, and client dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants that showed no discernible return on investment. He had been piloting a state-of-the-art ship, but he had been so focused on the view from the bridge that he hadn't noticed the hull was riddled with leaks and barnacles. I, on the other hand, was interested only in the integrity of the hull. I began my work, redlining budgets, terminating vendor contracts, and drafting new, ruthlessly efficient operational protocols. I was not just the new captain, I was the ship's engineer, stripping the vessel down to its essential components before I could begin to steer it in a new direction. The first wave of resistance came, as I had predicted, from Marcus Vance. He was the head of sales, Julian's oldest friend and most loyal bulldog, a charismatic, silver-haired salesman of the old school who believed business was forged in steakhouses and on golf courses. During the 2 o'clock meeting, after I had laid out my initial, stark budget revisions, he was the first to speak. "Miss Sterling," he began, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that was accustomed to charming, not challenging. "With all due respect, a company like Vanguard is built on relationships. You can't build relationships through a spreadsheet. The travel, the dinners, that's not waste. That's the lifeblood of our sales division. You cut that, you cut the heart out of this company." The other department heads, terrified but emboldened by his stand, murmured in agreement. They were watching me, testing me. They expected me to argue, to debate. They did not yet understand my methods. I didn't raise my voice. I simply tapped a command on the tablet built into the conference table. The central monitor at the end of the boardroom, which had been displaying the new budget, flickered to life with a series of new charts. They were graphs I had prepared during the night. "You're right, Marcus," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "Relationships are important, which is why I took the liberty of cross-referencing your departments, T&E spending, client by client, with your sales figures and net profit margins for the past 3 fiscal years." The screen now showed a complex scatter plot. On one axis, the amount of money spent on a client relationship. On the other, the profit generated by that client. There was no discernible correlation. In fact, a blind monkey throwing darts at a list of clients would have generated a more efficient return on investment. "This data," I continued, my voice as cool and sterile as the numbers on the screen, "shows that your department's highest expenses are linked to your low accounts. You spent over $100,000 last year wining and dining a client who, after the cost of servicing their account is factored in, represents a net loss for this company. That's not a relationship, Marcus. That's a charity. And I am not running a charity." I brought up another slide, a list of his top 10 salesmen by volume, and next to it, a list of his top 10 by profitability. They were not the same lists. The man he had crowned Salesman of the Year was actually number 9 on the profitability list. "You have been rewarding volume over value," I stated. "You have been incentivizing your team to make expensive low-margin sales that look good on a top-line report but do nothing for our bottom line. The old model is broken. It is inefficient. It is based on ego and tradition, not on results." Marcus Vance's confident, handsome face had gone pale. He was staring at the screen, at the stark, undeniable truth of his own failure laid bare for all his peers to see. The bulldog had been muzzled by his own data. "The budget cuts are not a suggestion," I concluded, my gaze sweeping the entire table. "They are an order. The sales commission structure will be completely overhauled, effective next quarter, to be based solely on net profit margin. You will learn to sell smart, not just big. You will adapt to the new, data-driven reality of this company, or you will be made redundant. Is that understood?" I had not shouted. I had not threatened. I had simply presented the truth. I had dismantled his entire philosophy with his own numbers. He stared at me for a long, silent moment, the power draining from him, his authority evaporating in the cold, hard light of the data. Then, he gave a single, curt nod. "Understood," he said, the word clipped, defeated. The rebellion was over. The message was sent. The age of data had begun. I went home late that night. The drive back to the house felt like a journey to a foreign country. The company was now my territory, a landscape of numbers and systems I understood implicitly. The house, on the other hand, was a battlefield of a different sort, one defined by the treacherous, unpredictable landscape of human emotion. He was waiting for me. I knew he would be. He was sitting in the dark in the living room, the room where he had so triumphantly demanded my life just 2 nights before. The only light was the cold, blue glow of the city lights through the vast window. A bottle of scotch, half empty, sat on the table beside him. He didn't speak as I walked in. He just watched me, his eyes 2 dark holes in the silhouette of his face. The silence was heavy, thick with a toxic mixture of hatred and broken history. I flicked on a lamp, and the sudden light was merciless. He looked terrible. His face was puffy, his eyes bloodshot. The immaculate, handsome machine was broken, rusted from the inside out. The shock had finally curdled into a bitter, venomous rage. "You," he spat, the word a poison dart. "You bitch." I placed my briefcase down on a chair. I did not react. I was still in analyst mode, observing, gathering data. "Did you enjoy it?" he sneered, his voice a low, ugly rasp. "Did you enjoy humiliating me, destroying my life? Was it worth it, Kaylin?" "It wasn't about enjoyment, Julian," I said, my voice quiet, tired. "It was a business transaction." "Business?" He laughed, a harsh, broken sound that was half a sob. "Don't you dare hide behind that. This was personal. This was some kind of sick, twisted revenge for Popovka, because I was more successful than you, because I asked you to be my wife instead of my competitor." And there it was, the spark. the flash of raw emotion I had kept so carefully suppressed. The cool, analytical surface of my control finally cracked. "No, Julian," I said, my voice dangerously low. "It was because you tried to erase me." He looked at me, confused. "What the hell are you talking about? You didn't ask me to be your wife," I said, taking a step towards him. The exhaustion I felt was suddenly gone, replaced by a cold, burning anger that had been simmering for a decade. "You asked me to be a prop, an accessory, a well-managed asset. You stood in this very room and called my life's work, my passion, a hobby. You called my salary laughably obsolete. You didn't just disrespect me, you dismissed me. You looked at my entire identity, everything I was outside of being your wife, and you decided it was worthless, a distraction." I was standing in front of him now, my eyes boring into his. "You didn't want a partner. You wanted a pretty, silent foundation for the empire you wanted to build with another woman. You thought I was the dirt beneath your feet, something to be built upon and then forgotten. You were wrong. I am not the foundation. I am the architect, and I do not take kindly to being made redundant." He stared at me, his drunken, rage-filled eyes slowly filling with a dawning, horrified comprehension. He was finally seeing me, not his wife, not the quiet woman who organized his dinner parties. He was seeing the analyst, the strategist, the woman who had just dismantled his entire world, not out of spite, but as a logical, tactical response to a perceived threat. "So you destroyed me," he whispered, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a hollow, gaping despair. "No," I said, the coldness returning to my voice. "I didn't destroy you. I acquired you. There's a difference." I turned and walked away, leaving him there in the lamplight with his bottle and his broken life. I went upstairs to the master bedroom, our bedroom. I walked into the vast, silent space and felt a profound, crushing wave of nothing, no triumph, no satisfaction, just the cold, stark reality of my victory. I had the company, I had the power, I had Tay Revenji, I had won, and I was utterly, completely, and irrevocably alone. This house was no longer a home, it was just another asset. And the man downstairs was no longer my husband. He was just a liability I had yet to liquidate. The week following our confrontation was defined by a silence so profound, so heavy, it felt like a physical pressure in the house. It was the deep, sub-zero silence of a polar night. We were two ghosts haunting the same opulent mausoleum, moving through rooms and hallways with a careful, deliberate avoidance, creating invisible perimeters and unspoken truces. He had claimed the west wing of the house as his territory. I occupied the east. The vast, central living space became a demilitarized zone, a no man's land of marble and glass that neither of us crossed. My life became a study in from 5 in the morning until 10 at night. I was Kaylin Sterling, CEO. I was a creature of pure, dispassionate logic. I lived in my new office, a minimalist command center of glowing screens and clean data streams. I was a surgeon, cutting the fat from the company with a steady, merciless hand. I implemented new efficiency protocols, renegotiated supply chain contracts, and built a new corporate culture based on the brutal, beautiful clarity of numbers. The company, a ship that had been listing under the weight of Julian's ego, was slowly, steadily righting itself. The board was compliant. The department heads, having witnessed the public evisceration of Marcus Vance, were models of terrified cooperation. I was in absolute control. But when I returned home each night, I would shed that identity at the door. I would become Kaylin, the victor, the conqueror, and I would be confronted with the spoils of my war, a broken man marinating in scotch and self-pity, in the west wing of my house. His presence was a constant, low-level hum of psychic static, a loose variable, a piece of unresolved business that offended my innate need for order. He was a liability, and I knew, with the same certainty that I knew a poorly balanced portfolio was a path to ruin, that he had to be liquidated. "The divorce papers are ready," Mara said, her face a grim mask on my office video monitor. "It's a clean, standard no-fault filing. The prenuptial agreement makes the division of assets straightforward. What's his is his. What's yours is yours. Which means he gets his personal effects, the sports car, and his stock portfolio, which, after the recent dip, is worth considerably less than it was last week." "It's not enough," I said, leaning back in my chair. "He's a wounded animal, Mara, and wounded animals are unpredictable. He could talk to the press, try to generate a sympathetic narrative. He could become a messy, public distraction. I don't want a distraction. I want him gone. I want him erased. Mara nodded, her expression grim. A clean extraction. I anticipated this. She brought up another document on her screen. I've drafted a severance agreement. Think of it as a golden parachute from the marriage. It's generous. A multi-million-dollar cash settlement, title to the house, a small portfolio of non-voting shares in a subsidiary company. Enough for him to live a life of quiet luxury forever. And the conditions? I asked. Ironclad, Mara replied, a flicker of pride in her eyes. A non-disclosure agreement so comprehensive he won't be able to mention your name, or Vanguard's, in a sentence, without forfeiting the entire package. A non-compete clause that prevents him from working in this industry, in any capacity, on this continent for the next 50 years. He takes the money, and in return, he vanishes. He ceases to be a factor in your life. It was perfect. A neat, surgical solution. A financial transaction to solve an emotional problem. It was the only language I truly trusted. Prepare the documents, I said. I'll present them to him tonight. Just as our call was ending, my assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Ms. Sterling, I apologize for the interruption, but you have a visitor, a Ms. Isolde Belmont. She insists it is a matter of urgent importance. I exchanged a look with Mara. Isolde, the she-wolf, the catalyst for this entire affair. My analysis had predicted she would go to ground, licking her wounds, attempting to salvage her own crumbling empire. For her to show her face here, in my tower, was an unexpected move, an interesting new data point. Let her stew in the lobby for 10 minutes, I told Chloe, then send her up. Isolde Belmont walked into my minimalist office like a queen entering a conquered territory. She was still breathtakingly elegant, dressed in a sharp, black dress that probably cost more than my first car. But there were fine new lines of stress around her eyes, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her manicured hands. She was a predator, yes, but a wounded one, and she was here because she was running out of options. Ms. Sterling, she said, her voice a cool, silken purr. You've redecorated. I find the absence of personality rather telling. I find personality to be an inefficient use of office space. Miss Belmont, I replied, gesturing to the simple chair opposite my desk. Please, sit. To what do I owe the dubious pleasure of this visit? She sat, crossing her long legs. I'm not here to trade insults, though I must admit. Your demolition of Julian was a work of art. Brutal, but art nonetheless. I'm not interested in your flattery, I said. What do you want? A lifeline, she said. The word blunt, stripped of its usual charm. The fallout from the failed merger has been catastrophic for my investors. Belmont Capital is on the verge of collapse. I need an infusion of capital. A partnership. I laughed. A short, dry, humorless sound. You have a remarkable amount of nerve. You come into my office and ask me to save you after you tried to build your future on the wreckage of my marriage. Our interests are aligned now, she countered, leaning forward, her eyes gleaming with a desperate, feral intelligence. I know things, Ms. Sterling. I know Julian, intimately. I know his weaknesses, his secrets, the things even a wife might not know. He will not go quietly. He will try to burn you down with him. I can help you manage that. In exchange for a small, strategic investment from Vanguard into one of my more stable assets. I studied her. She was a snake, but a snake could be a useful weapon if you knew how to handle it, and if you remembered where the fangs were. Trusting her was out of the question, but using her, that was a different calculation entirely. I will consider it, I said, my voice Send me a proposal. My team will analyze it. She knew it was a dismissal, but it was the sliver of hope she had come for. She stood, gave me a curt, professional nod, and walked out. The faint, floral scent of her perfume lingered in the air, a ghost of the past, and a potential tool for the future. That evening, I went home and entered the demilitarized zone. Julian was in the living room, staring out the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was sober this time. The wild, impotent rage had cooled into something far more dangerous, a still, deep, bitter nihilism. I placed the portfolio containing the divorce papers and the severance offer on the coffee table between us. These are for you, I said simply. He looked at the portfolio, then at me, a dead, empty smile on his face. Ah, yes, the final invoice, the bill for my own destruction. How generous, it is generous. Julian, I said, my voice even, it is more than fair. It is a clean break, an opportunity for you to start a new life, away from all of this. He opened the portfolio and scanned the first page of the severance agreement. He saw the numbers, he saw the offer of the house, and then he did something I had not factored into my analysis. He began to laugh. It was a quiet, hollow, terrible sound. A new life, he said, tossing the papers back onto the table. You still don't get it, do you, Kaylin? You took my life. This company, it wasn't just a business. To me, it was my name, my identity, my legacy. And you took it. You think you can pay me for that? You think you can put a price on my entire existence and have me just walk away? This is the best offer you will get, Julian, I said, my voice hardening. I don't want an offer, he replied, his eyes glittering with a new, strange light. The light of a man with nothing left to lose. I don't want the money. I don't want the house. What I want is to watch you suffer. I'm not signing anything. I'm going to fight you on this divorce. I am going to drag your name, and the company's name, through the muddiest, most public, most humiliating battle you can possibly imagine. I may not be able to win, but I can sure as hell make sure you don't enjoy the victory. He stood up and walked away, leaving the portfolio sitting on the table, a testament to my failed strategy. I had made a critical error. I had assumed he was a rational actor, that he would make the logical choice, but I had destroyed his logic. I had left him with only one weapon, the power to be a spoiler, the power to create chaos. I stood there in the silent room, my neat, surgical plan in ruins. Liquidating him financially was not an option. He had refused the anesthetic. He wanted the pain. For both of us, my mind raced, discarding my old plan and formulating a new one. I thought of Asoda. I thought of her words. I know his weaknesses, his secrets. My strategy had been based on finance, on logic, that had failed. Therefore, my new strategy had to be based on something else, something more personal, more psychological, more cruel. If Julian wouldn't take the money to disappear, I would have to find another form of leverage, a non-financial one. I would have to find the one thing he had left to lose, the one last shred of pride or secrecy he was clinging to, and I would have to put a price on that. The game was no longer corporate. It had just become personal. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that it was a game I was going to be terrifyingly good at. Julian's declaration of war changed the equation. My strategy, so elegantly designed on the principles of finance and logic, had been rendered obsolete by a single unpredictable variable, human bitterness. He had rejected the logic of a clean, profitable exit. He had chosen, instead, the chaotic, mutually assured destruction of a protracted public battle. He was a terrorist, and his only goal was to burn down the kingdom he could no longer rule, even if he was inside it when the fires started. I spent the morning after his refusal in my office, the 6 monitors in front of me displaying not market data, but probability models. I was running scenarios: the potential damage of a messy, public divorce, the effect on Vanguard's stock price, the impact on employee morale and client confidence. Every model, every projection, came to the same conclusion. While I would undoubtedly win in court, the victory would be the brand would be tarnished, my leadership would be questioned, and the clean, efficient machine I was trying to build would be mired in the mud of scandal. He's going to turn this into a circus, I told Mara, who was patched in on my secure video line. He'll play the victim, the loving husband betrayed by a cold, ambitious wife. The media will devour it. It's a narrative that sells. He will try, Mara agreed, her face a grim mask. We can fight back, with facts, but mudsticks, Caleb, especially when it's thrown in public. He knows he can't hurt you legally, so he has chosen to hurt you reputationally. Then we have to ensure he never gets the chance, I said, my voice hardening. My mind was recalibrating, shifting from a defensive posture to an offensive one. The financial leverage has failed. Therefore, we need a new form of leverage, one that is non-financial, one that is absolute. Mara's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew me well enough to understand what I was implying. You're moving off the legal chessboard and onto a different one, Kaylin. Be careful. That board has no rules. The only rule is winning, I replied. and I have a new potential source of intelligence. I'm meeting her for lunch. The restaurant was a discreet, terrifyingly expensive establishment, tucked away in a quiet side street, a place where secrets were traded over $12 bottles of sparkling water. Isolde Belmont was already there when I arrived, seated at a secluded corner table. She looked, as always, impeccable, a predator at rest. "You came," she said, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "I had a feeling you would." Julian's ego was always his most predictable and most vulnerable asset. "I'm not here for small talk, Isolde," I said, getting straight to the point. "You offered me information. Leverage against Julian. You said you knew his secrets. I'm not interested in rumors of his infidelities. Those are common, and ultimately, useless. I need something definitive. Something that would not just embarrass him, but silence him." "What, exactly, do you have to sell?" She took a slow, deliberate sip of her water. "And what, exactly, are you offering to buy it with?" She countered. "My needs haven't changed. Ms. Sterling, my subsidiary, Belmont Aerospace, is sound, but it's facing a liquidity crisis thanks to the fallout from your corporate correction. I need a $20 million capital infusion from Vanguard. Consider it a strategic investment." "That's a steep price for information," I said. "It is a steep price for my silence, and for the weapon that will guarantee yours," she replied smoothly. $20 million is a bargain compared to the hundreds of millions you stand to lose in market capitalization from a prolonged, ugly public fight with your soon-to-be ex-husband." She was right. Her analysis was flawless. "Fine," I said. "I will authorize the investment, pending verification of the information you provide. Now, what is it?" Isolde leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Everyone knows the story of Julian Maxwell, the self-made titan, the man who built Vanguard Innovations from the ground up with nothing but his own genius and a small seed loan from his father. It's a beautiful story, a powerful myth, and it is a complete and utter lie." I listened, my face a mask of neutrality, as she laid it all out. Julian's father, Arthur Maxwell, had not been a successful small-town businessman who gave his son a modest loan. He had been the controller of a mid-sized manufacturing plant in Ohio. And 30 years ago, he had been caught embezzling from the company's employee pension fund. He had stolen the retirement savings of hundreds of working-class families, but he was never charged. The company, fearing a public scandal, had allowed Arthur to quietly resign. They covered up the crime, and the families were told the fund had collapsed due to a series of bad investments. They lost everything, and Arthur Maxwell had used that stolen money, nearly $2 million, to bankroll his son's ambitious startup, Julian's entire empire. Isolde concluded, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "His entire identity as a self-made man is built on the stolen pensions of factory workers. He's not a visionary, he's the son of a common thief. He told me this himself, one night, after too much brandy. He was proud of it, proud of how his father had protected him, how they had gotten away with it. He believes it's a sign of his own manifest destiny." I sat there, processing the information. It was perfect. It was devastating. It wasn't just a secret that would humiliate him. It was a truth that would retroactively invalidate his entire life, everything he had ever claimed to be. It was a weapon of mass psychological destruction. "How can you prove this?" I asked. "The company was called Northwood Manufacturing," Isolde said. "It was bought out by a larger conglomerate in the late 90s, but the records, old HR files, financial statements, they must still exist somewhere, buried in an archive. And I imagine some of those families who lost everything are still around, still angry. All you need to do is look." I paid for lunch. The deal was struck. The investigation was swift and surgical. I tasked Mara with the legal archaeology, and she, in turn, hired a team of the best private investigators I had ever worked with. They descended on the small, forgotten Ohio town where Julian grew up. They were ghosts, sifting through dusty archives, courthouse basements, and the memories of old men and women. They found everything: the paper trail of Arthur Maxwell's embezzlement, the internal company memos covering up the scandal, the list of the 217 families whose retirement funds had vanished. They even found one of those families, an elderly couple, the Kowalskis, who had worked at the plant for a combined 70 years. They were living on Social Security in a small, rented apartment, their golden years stolen from them. The investigator's report included a tearful, heartbreaking interview with them about the day they learned their pensions were gone. It was all the proof I needed. Ironclad, devastating. That evening, I went home to face my husband for the last time. He was in the West Wing, in the library, surrounded by the leather-bound books he had never read. He was standing by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, a look of smug, nihilistic defiance on his face. He was ready for a fight. He was expecting another argument about money. I said nothing. I simply walked to the large oaked table in the center of the room and placed a single, thin file folder on its polished surface. He glanced at it, then back at me. "What's this?" "Another generous offer." "I told you, Kaylin, I'm not interested." "This is not an offer, Julian," I said, my voice quiet, almost gentle. "It is a choice," he snorted, walking over to the table. He picked up the file and opened it. The first page was a copy of an old newspaper clipping from a local Ohio paper. The headline read, "Northwood Manufacturing Pension Fund Collapses, Citing Market Volatility." The second page was a copy of an internal memo from Northwood's board, detailing Arthur Maxwell's resignation due to accounting irregularities. The third was a bank statement, showing a $2 million transfer from an offshore account owned by Arthur to a newly incorporated company named Vanguard Innovations, owned by his son Julian. I watched as the color drained from his face. His hand began to tremble. The smug defiance was gone, replaced by a dawning, animalistic terror. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with horror. Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "The source is irrelevant," I said. "The facts are not your legacy. Your entire life's work, your myth as a self-made man, it's all built on a lie, a dirty, pathetic little crime committed against people like the Kowalskis." I slid another document across the table. It was the transcript of the investigator's interview with the elderly couple. He flinched as if the paper itself were hot. He sank into a chair, his body seeming to collapse in on itself. He was broken, utterly and completely. I had not attacked his company. I had not attacked his finances. I had attacked his story, and I had discovered it was the only thing he truly had. I placed two final documents on the table in front of him. "Here are two paths, Julian," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "On your left is the divorce settlement and severance agreement you rejected yesterday. It's East Gennaro's. It is silent. It allows you to disappear with some dignity intact. On your right," I tapped the second document, "is a press release prepared for Ms. Renault at the Wall Street Journal. It contains a full, corroborated account of the Northwood manufacturing scandal and the true origins of Vanguard's seed money. It includes interviews with the affected families and copies of all relevant documents." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a final, chilling whisper. "You have 1 hour to decide which one of these documents I sign and which one I shred. You wanted to make this personal. Congratulations, you've succeeded. The choice, as always, is yours." I turned and walked out of the library, leaving him alone with the ruins of his life. The war was over. I had won. I had achieved the clean extraction I required. But as I walked through the silent, empty halls of my house, I felt no triumph. I felt only the cold, heavy weight of the weapon I had been forced to build, and the chilling realization of the woman I had had to become to wield it. I did not wait in the library. To remain there would have been to grant the moment the significance of a shared experience. This was not a negotiation. It was a capitulation. His, not mine. I retreated to my study, the true seat of my power, and watched the second hand on my monitor's clock sweep its slow, relentless circle. The 60 minutes I had given him were not for him to decide if he would sign. They were for him to sit with the suffocating, absolute certainty of why he would sign. It was a period of instruction. The final, brutal lesson in a curriculum of his own design. At the 58th minute, the door to my study opened. Julian stood in the doorway. He was a ghost, a hollowed-out, spectral version of the magnificent man who had dominated my life for a decade. The rage was gone. The defiance was gone. The nihilism was gone. All that remained was a vast, empty landscape of shame. He was a king who had been forced to look upon the rotted foundations of his own castle, and the sight had broken him. He did not speak. He walked stiffly to my desk, his movements clumsy, robotic. He picked up the pen I had left there. His hand, the hand that had once signed multi-million-dollar deals with a confident flourish, was trembling so violently he could barely hold it. He did not look at the documents. He simply signed where the small, yellow tabs Mara had placed indicated he should. He signed the divorce petition. He signed the comprehensive severance agreement. He signed the ironclad non-disclosure agreement. He signed away his past, his future, and his right to ever speak of me or this company again. He placed the pen down with a quiet click that seemed to echo in the silent room. Then he turned and walked out, his footsteps receding down the hall. I listened until I heard the front door open and then close. He was gone. The liability had been liquidated. The transaction was complete. I sat there for a long time, staring at his signature on the page. It was a jagged, barely legible scrawl, the final, erratic heartbeat of his former life. The war was over. My first call was to Mara. "It's done," I said, my voice flat. "The documents are signed." I could hear the sharp intake of breath on her end, followed by a long, slow exhale of professional relief. "I'll send a courier immediately," she said. "We'll file everything in the morning. He's neutralized, Kaylin. Legally, he no longer exists in your world." "Good," I said. My next call was to a number I had saved under a meaningless pseudonym. It was Isolde Belmont. "Ms. Belmont," I said when she answered. "This is Kaylin Sterling." "Ms. Sterling," she replied, her voice wary but hopeful. "I trust my information proved useful." "It was satisfactory," I replied, my voice cool and precise. "As per our agreement, I have just authorized the strategic investment into Belmont Aerospace. The funds will be transferred by end of business tomorrow." A wave of palpable relief washed through her voice. "Thank you, Kaylin. You won't regret this." "This is not a partnership, Isolde," I clarified, my voice leaving no room for misunderstanding. "It is a transaction. Vanguard now owns a 30% stake in your subsidiary, which means a part of you now reports to me. I will expect quarterly reports and full transparency. Do not make me regret this." I hung up before she could reply. A former enemy had just become a dependent asset, another variable brought under control. My final task of the night was the most important. I contacted Mara again. "I'm transferring $100 million from my personal account to a new trust," I told her. "I want you to establish it anonymously. It will be called the Northwood Fund. I want you to hire a team of investigators, the best there are, to find every one of the 217 families affected by the pension collapse 30 years ago. You will make them whole, with interest, and with a formal, anonymous apology for the market forces that caused their hardship." Mara was silent for a long moment. "That's generous, Kaylin," she finally said, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite decipher. "That's not something you have to do." "Yes, it is," I said. It wasn't about guilt. It wasn't about altruism. It was about the numbers. A debt had been created long ago, a debt of stolen futures and broken trust. The debt had financed the creation of my company, and the books, my books, had to be balanced. It was a private act of correction in a world of chaos, an accounting of the soul. 6 months later, Vanguard Innovations, rebranded simply as Vanguard under my leadership, was a different company. It was leaner, more agile, more profitable than it had ever been under Julian. I had stripped it of his vanity projects and focused its resources on its core competencies, augmenting them with my own analytical, predictive models. We were not just a logistics company anymore. We were a logistics intelligence firm, selling not just transportation, but data, predictability, certainty. The market had responded with ecstatic enthusiasm. Our stock price had tripled. I stood before the board of directors in my new boardroom. The mahogany and leather were gone, replaced by glass, steel, and a wall of interactive data screens. I was presenting my 5-year strategic plan, a vision for the company's expansion into new global markets, powered by a proprietary AI I had developed. I was in my element, in absolute control. My voice was confident. My arguments were unassailable, backed by reams of data and flawless projections. I saw the looks on the faces of the board members, the same men who had served under Julian. Fear they had initially held for me had been replaced by a deep, profound, and highly profitable respect. They did not see a woman. They did not see a CEO's ex-wife. They saw a visionary. They saw a winner. The professional victory was absolute. Later that evening, long after the last employee had gone home, I stood alone in my office. The office I had stripped of all personality, of all warmth. The city spread out before me, a glittering, indifferent tapestry of a million lives. It was the kingdom I had conquered, the spoils of a war I had won. I thought back to the woman I had been, the quiet analyst in the wingback chair, the wife who had allowed her own brilliance to be dimmed in the blinding light of her husband's ego. She was a ghost, a distant memory. I had killed her to survive. And in her place, this new woman had risen, a woman who could dismantle a company, neutralize a rival, and shatter a man's soul without flinching. A woman who could command the respect of sharks and the fear of lions. Was it worth it? The question hung in the silent, sterile air of the office. The answer was not a simple yes or no. It was a complex, multivariable equation. To have done nothing, to have allowed Julian to quit my job, to erase my identity. That would have been a death of a different kind. A slow, quiet suffocation. That was not an acceptable outcome. So yes, it was worth it, because the alternative was oblivion. But the price had been steep. I had won the company. I had won my freedom. I had won my future. But in the process of waging my war, I had become the weapon, the cold, hard, ruthlessly efficient instrument of my own victory. The strategist who saw people as assets and liabilities. The analyst who saw life as a series of equations to be solved. I had risen from the ashes of my old life, just as I had intended. I was the phoenix, powerful, triumphant, unstoppable. But a phoenix, I now realized, is a majestic and terribly solitary creature. It rises alone. It flies alone. And its throne, high above the world, is a lonely and very cold place to be. I had my empire, and I was its sole and silent occupant.